We all remember Jordan Staal, right? Longtime Penguin, longtime Hurricane now, current captain of the Hurricanes, but most importantly, the third line center on that 2009 Stanley Cup championship Pittsburgh Penguin team. Jordan Staal has had a very long NHL career and a very solid NHL career. He's, for the most part, stayed healthy, scored about 40 points every year consistently, and he's been a part of a lot of very good teams. But a lot of people forget that he was a Penguin, honestly. Not that they forgot his time in Pittsburgh, it's just that they forget that he's still in the league, and he's not necessarily old, but he's a veteran. He came into the league very early, being drafted in 2006, and has had just what you would call a solid, solidified NHL career. So today, now that I've hit 100 subscribers finally, I'm going to be going over the Jordan Staal trade tree. Now, if you don't know what a trade tree is, it's simply tracking a player and what trades have eventually been able to get out of that player. So, for instance, Jordan Staal was traded for 3 pieces at the 2012 NHL draft, which we'll get to in a second. Those pieces then were also traded, and then they stem out a little bit more, and that's where you get the tree analogy, that it looks like a tree when you're done with it. Steve Dangle, again, I'm not trying to steal all of his content, but I wanted to do a Penguins one of this. He has his own Sportsnet trade trees that are obviously much more high quality than this, but still, I want to do a Jordan Staal trade tree. Now, in his videos, he usually starts with a big trade. And not to say that I'm not going to be starting with a big trade, but he starts with a trade that happened. And he doesn't necessarily go over the players that were involved before that. In this case, Jordan Staal was drafted by the Pittsburgh Penguins, so there's nothing that comes before the trade tree in this, and there's no other, parts. He's not part of a trade that happened before, things like that. He wasn't a free agency signing. He was drafted here. And I want to go over how that eventually led to the Penguins getting Nick Bonino, Carl Hagelin, and Jared McCann, and so many more others. Now, let's start with the man himself, Jordan Staal. And it's a win already for the Penguins in the acquisition that they got Jordan Staal and drafted him in the 2006 NHL draft. He was drafted in the first round, 6 overall that year. He spent 6 years with Pittsburgh, 431 games played, 248 points. He was a crucial third-line center in those back-to-back Stanley Cup final appearances and the 2009 Stanley Cup championship. And he scored so many clutch goals, especially that shorthanded goal, which we'll never forget, against the Red Wings. And he just had a phenomenal career, young career with the Penguins. But there was a lot of speculation, considering the fact that the Penguins had Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby, that Jordan Staal was not getting enough spotlight. So he declined a 10-year extension. 10 years. Crazy that was allowed back then. A 10-year, $6 million average extension with the Penguins. And he signed that extension with the Carolina Hurricanes. The difference obviously being that the Hurricanes didn't have a Crosby or Malkin. The big trade, and this was a very big trade at the time, considering that this draft was held in Pittsburgh, the 2012 NHL draft. The Penguins had a first-round pick, and they also acquired a first-round pick in this. The Penguins were really seeking defensemen after their terrible loss to the Philadelphia Flyers in the 2012 playoffs, where it had a horrendous amount of goals scored in that series. The Penguins traded Jordan Staal for 3 pieces to the Carolina Hurricanes in exchange for the Hurricanes' former second-round draft pick by a guy named Brian Dumoulin, the 2012 8th overall selection, which Carolina had, and Brandon Sutter. Now, obviously, a trade tree ends, or the branch of it is clipped, when a player is still either on the team or walked in free agency. Brian Dumoulin's still in the Penguins, and he's been a very stable blue liner for the Penguins. He only has 11 career goals. He's no offensive genius or anything like that, but Dumoulin has been nothing but phenomenal in his time in Pittsburgh, especially during the Cup runs. He was on that first pairing with Letang. He worked his way up from Wilkes-Barre, and he became a stalwart on the D pairs there. And while this year so far he hasn't looked greatest, and he's also hurt right now, Dumoulin has had a very successful young career with the Penguins. He's currently inching towards his 30s right now, but still, Dumoulin, he signed to a pretty good deal, around $4 million, and he'll be a very stable defenseman for the Penguins in the past and in the future now. He's got his his name on the Stanley Cup twice already. So before we get into who the Penguins drafted with the 2012 8th overall selection, let's go over to the left side of the board with Brandon Sutter and who we ended up getting for the Penguins. And this is honestly really interesting because after Sutter was traded for, which you'll see, a third line center, the Penguins just kept on replacing one for one in a bunch of these trades. Now, Brandon Sutter was not Jordan Staal in Pittsburgh, but he was still very stable as that third line center. And honestly, he was one of my favorite players growing up. I really enjoyed watching Brandon Sutter play. He was by no means the most offensively gifted center in the entire league, but still behind Crosby and Malkin, you didn't have to be. And he was very good on the penalty kill, very good defensively. And I even got a shirtsy of him back in like 2013 when the Penguins were gearing up for that big postseason run, which never happened. But Brandon Sutter was still a very solid third line center for the Penguins, and he still is right now for the Vancouver Canucks, who we eventually traded him for. He battled a little bit with injuries, but for the most part, he's had a solid career with 3 teams, the Penguins being one of them. I think the farthest he's ever made it in the playoffs, though, was with the Penguins. I don't see, Vancouver, no, and Carolina, no. It was that 2013 team that made it to the Eastern Conference Final, which was an unfortunate loss, but still, Brandon Sutter had a solid career with the Penguins. He only spent 3 years in Pittsburgh. He had a career of 78 points in 209 games with Pittsburgh. Again, not the most offensively gifted, but he scored a lot of clutch playoff goals. He was essentially the light version of Jordan Staal, and that kind of makes sense given the fact that we traded Jordan Staal for him, and Brandon Sutter was our third line center to replace Jordan Staal. But once Jim Rutherford came in, he made a switch up with Brandon Sutter and acquired a new third line center. And this one definitely worked out for the Penguins. On January 26, 2016, Brandon Sutter was traded for Nick Bonino and Adam Clendening. Nick Bonino had only 2 years with Pittsburgh, and in both of those years, guess what happened? He was great in the playoffs for us. He obviously was in the center of that HBK line, the Hagelin-Bonino-Kessel line, which we'll get to Hagelin later, actually. And Bonino was just a solid overall player and a third-line center that the Penguins needed. He had 66 points in 143 games with the Penguins regular season, but in the playoffs, again, of course, he had a couple of very close goals, including the 2016 elimination in Game 6 of the Washington Capitals in overtime, which we'll never forget. And then the Bonino calls against the Sharks. He only, again, spending 2 years in Pittsburgh, he's a legacy player, especially when you have your name on those 2 Stanley Cups, and you're remembered for what you did in the playoffs. So Bonino, we wished him the best because eventually he left in free agency to go sign with the Nashville Predators, which is the team we just beat in the 2017 Stanley Cup Finals. So that's a little bit interesting. So that branch is over there. Nick Bonino is done in this scenario. His time in Pittsburgh ends with the 2017 Stanley Cup. And he goes off to sign with the Predators. Now he's with the Wild, but that's not a part of this trade tree. The other player is Adam Clendening, who was just an AHL defense for the Penguins. He kind of was just, thrown to Wilkes-Barre. But he was eventually packaged in a deal with David Perron. Now, this is where we get into trade trees where David Perron is not part of this trade tree, but he is at the same time, because he obviously wasn't a player that the Penguins got from Jordan Staal's trade tree. He was a player that was acquired from a first-round pick and Rob Klinkhammer, which is not part of this trade tree. But he was still packaged with Adam Clendening, because you're not going to trade Adam Clendening straight up for this next player. And he was eventually traded to Anaheim for Carl Hagelin. So Carl Hagelin enters this trade tree, and again, it wasn't just Adam Clendening for Carl Hagelin. It was Adam Clendening and David Perron for Carl Hagelin. That trade happening on January 26th of 2016. Now, of course, Hagelin, again, was one of those key, crucial playoff performers for the Penguins, especially on the penalty kill and that HBK line. That line controlled play for the Penguins in the postseason in 2016, and then again following it up in 2017. Hagelin had another great postseason. He sealed the deal there with the empty net goal against Nashville. And Hagelin, again, another franchise or legacy player for the Penguins. Not franchise, legacy player. He'll be remembered is what I'm trying to say, even though he only spent a small amount of time with the Penguins. Now, he did stick around after the Cup runs, and he played a couple more seasons with the Penguins. 83 regular season points in 195 games, and he was eventually one of the the players that the Rutherford and the Penguins decided to get rid of and cut because, you can't keep that roster together for too long, and he was traded. Hagelin was traded on November 14th of 2018, 1-for-1 for Tanner Pearson out of Los Angeles. And Tanner Pearson will be a very forgotten name if he is not already in Pittsburgh. Tanner Pearson only played about half a season with the Penguins, and while he looked good in some stretches, he never was the player that the Penguins really wanted him to be, and the player that Los Angeles had back in their cup runs. He had 14 points in 44 regular season games for the Penguins. Again, nothing terrible, but still the price that you play with a legacy player in Carl Hagelin to get a guy like Pearson. And also the Penguins did not give him that much time because they traded him on February 25th of 2019. They also made another 1-for-1 trade here, and they traded him 1-for-1 for Erik Gudbranson, and this trade was very criticized at the time it was, and looking back on it, doesn't look too great right now either, considering Tanner Pearson is having a pretty decent resurgence of his career in Vancouver right now, and Gudbranson left the Penguins pretty quickly. Actually, looking back on Gudbranson's numbers, it's kind of surprising that he only played 26 games for the Penguins and had 2 points. He was a +7, though. And there was a lot of criticism when having him and Jack Johnson on the same team and having them as a defensive pairing as well. Didn't really work out for the Penguins. Obviously, the loss to the Islanders didn't really go over well, and Gudbranson was shipped out early in the 2019 season. Gudbranson was then traded and pretty much just shed because he had a $4 million cap hit. He was traded to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for a 2021 7th-round pick and a prospect by the name of Andreas Martinson. Andreas Martinson never made it to the NHL, still hasn't, and was let go in free agency. And that 2021 7th-round pick is a 2021 7th-round pick, so it has not happened yet. The Penguins still have it, and that's where that branch ends. So looking back on this side of the tree, the Penguins trade Jordan Staal for another third-line center in Brandon Sutter. He helps get them another third-line center in Nick Bonino and Carl Hagelin, as well as Tanner Pearson and Erik Gudbranson, who didn't really work out, and eventually that trade tree is shedding to what it is now and is just a 7th-round pick right now. But still, looking back on it, you got a bunch of great players there, and I could really just argue that the Penguins won this trade tree based on this side, but wait till we get to the next side. The Penguins loaded up on defense in this year's draft, not only with the acquisition of Brian Dumoulin, they also drafted Olli Maatta later in this draft, and they got Derek Pouliot. The Penguins were really searching for young defensemen, given the loss to Philadelphia in the past year's playoffs where they just got lit up and embarrassed, really. So defense was really the main priority for the Penguins, trying to get some help with Crystal Tang there, who was starting to emerge and be towards his prime right now. So the Penguins, they go in and they draft Derek Pouliot. Let's not talk about who was drafted after, Jacob Trouba, because the Penguins really just missed this draft pick, and Pouliot was not good for the Penguins, and it just didn't work out. He got 67 games of NHL action with the Pittsburgh Penguins, only had 14 points. There are people that are still believing in him, though, as the Philadelphia Flyers actually have him in their AHL system right now. Pouliot, I'm just going to tell you right now, Philly, he's not going to work out. There was a lot of pressure on him to become that next stable young defenseman for the Penguins, and it really just didn't happen. He was very offensively gifted, and we even had his former Portland Winterhawks coach in Mike Johnston coach him in the 2015 NHL season. Now, what's crazy about Pouliot, even though he was a failed prospect, he's a Stanley Cup champion. He played 33 games in the 2015-2016 season, and that's enough to get your name on the Stanley Cup. So, according to Hockey Reference, Derek Pouliot is a Stanley Cup champion, and I know that's kind of sad for people like Joe Thornton who, don't have one of them, and Derek Pouliot can just come in, be on a good team, and get his name on the cup, but it's how the league works. Now, Derek Pouliot did not work out, and as a result, the Penguins shipped him out to Vancouver for pretty much nothing. On October 3rd of 2018, Derek Pouliot was traded to the Vancouver Canucks for a 2018 4th-round pick that was Vancouver's, and Andre Pedan. Andre Pedan never played for the Penguins. He was an AHL forward, and he left in free agency. I'm not going to go over these AHL players, really, because there's not really enough time to, and it doesn't really matter because, no offense, they left in free agency, they never played a game for the Penguins, and there's other things to talk about. And yeah, The Penguins only got a fourth-round pick back in 2018 from the Vancouver Canucks in this trade, and that's where it ends. Oh, wait, it doesn't, because the Penguins used that pick in a bigger deal. Again, obviously didn't trade just this pick to get who they eventually get in this three-way trade. They added that 2018 fourth-round pick with Ryan Reeves, Ian Cole, a 2018 first-round pick, and goaltending prospect Philip Gustafsson, and they made a blockbuster trade with the Vegas Golden Knights and the Ottawa Senators, where the Penguins gave up, again, Ryan Reeves, Ian Cole, a 2018 first-round pick, and Philip Gustafsson. They acquired Vincent Dunn, Tobias Lindberg, and Derek Brassard. This is where it comes back to where it's ironic that Jordan Staal, being probably the greatest third-line center that has ever played for the Penguins in the Crosby and Malkin era, it's funny how pretty much every successor in the third-line center position for the Penguins, Nick Bonino, Brandon Sutter, and now Derek Brassard, have all been a part of this trade tree in some way, shape, or form. The Penguins go all out in the 2018 trade deadline to try and get another stable third-line center. And Derek Brassard is just what they go out and get. He was a very sought-out after player because Ottawa was just tanking after we eliminated them in the 2017 Eastern Conference Final. And Derek Brassard, his name was really highly regarded as a good pickup to get at the deadline, and Jim Rutherford did just that. And looking back on this trade, it's awful because really the Penguins gave up way too much, and Derek Brassard, he just didn't work out for the Penguins. He was brought in to be that clutch third-line center, goal-scoring, shorthanded goal scorer, and all that type of stuff. And he really wasn't. He only had 23 points in 54 games. I know that's not terrible, but still on a team like the Penguins, and especially with the lack of scoring that we did in that New York Islanders series, he was not really welcome here in Pittsburgh, especially by the media and the fans, who just didn't really see what Jim Rutherford and the rest of the league saw in him. And a solid player. He eventually he just crashed. His career really did. And I'm sorry if that's too harsh, but he didn't sign in free agency until very late, where I think he's on just a league minimum salary right now with Arizona. Last year he played with the Islanders on like a $1 million deal. And Brassard, his career really went downhill ever since he was traded from Ottawa to the Penguins. Now, before we get to Brassard, Tobias Lindberg was actually traded as well. On December 5th of 2018, Tobias Lindberg was packaged along with Stephen Elliott for McAvoy, Urkamps, and Ben Sexton, two AHL players that never ended up playing for the Penguins and just walked in free agency. That clips off the edges of that branch. And on the other side, Vincent Dunn. I wish it was Vince Dunn. They're not the same player. Vince Dunn is the St. Louis player who actually is on the market right now and on the trade block. Vincent Dunn was another AHL defenseman, or it might have been a forward, I don't even know. Never played for the Penguins, walked in free agency. And then, of course, Derek Brassard, it did not work out, but he was traded in another pretty decent deal where, again, the Penguins got two future third-line centers, and it dates back to Jordan Staal. Jordan Staal again. On February 1st of 2019, Derek Brassard was traded along with two fourth-round draft picks in exchange for Nick Bjugstad and Jared McCann. Jared McCann's still on the Penguins right now, of course. He's having a pretty decent season so far. He's got 2 or 3 goals so far, and he's still very young. And if you watch this channel for a while, you know that Jared McCann is someone that I'm really rooting for the Penguins because he's still young. He has the potential to become a solid third-line center for the Penguins, if not a very good top 6 winger for the Penguins as well. He's currently playing wing right now. We have Teddy Bluger at center right now. I don't know if that's stable enough, even though I love Bluger. But Jared McCann's still with the Penguins, and that ends that side of the trade tree. And then Nick Bjugstad. Bjugstad did not work out for the Penguins because he was hurt half of the time, and really that's what it boils down to. He had pretty good looks every now and then, but it just didn't work out. He had too high of a cap hit and too high of a injury-prone career. And then on September 11th of 2020, he was shipped out to Minnesota with Bill Guerin for a 2021 7th-round pick, and it is currently January of 2021 right now, so the 2021 draft has not happened. So this is the end of that segment of the trade tree, and by extension, the rest of the trade tree. So there it is, the Jordan Staal full trade tree. a lot of third line centers, which is crazy because Jordan Staal, again, being one of the best third line centers the Penguins have ever had, got them Brandon Sutter, got them Nick Bonino, got them Jared McCann, Nick Bukestad, and Derek Brassard. It's really interesting when you look back on this. So thank you all for 100 subscribers finally. I'm very excited to finally get this video out there and be able to explain to you how impactful Jordan Staal had, not only when he played for the Penguins, but the trade that sent him out got the Penguins 1 Dumoulin, 2 Hagelin, 3 Bonino, 4 Pouliot, Stanley Cup champions, and currently Jared McCann right now. So it's very interesting when you look back on trades like this, and I really hope to be doing some more. So I'll eventually be doing more trade trees in the future. Comment down below which trade tree you want me to do. I could do what Steve does and not pick a drafted or free agent player and just start with a player. Like, for instance, I could do Phil Kessel. But anyways, comment down below. Thank you. Like, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you guys for the next PFR and a bunch of other videos that I'll be planning to put out, including an NFL video, which is crazy because this is a hockey channel. Thank you all, and I'll see you guys in the next video.